Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast with two-time Olympic U.S. women's volleyball team captain Christa Dietzen is brought to you by Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum for $38 a month. You make a difference in a child's life by sponsoring them through Compassion International. Food, education, vocational training, all done in the name of Jesus. Compassion does it right, and your chance to make a difference in a child's life by sponsoring them and releasing them from poverty. The URL, the website, compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum and sponsor a child today. Today's guest on the podcast, two-time Olympic USA women's volleyball team captain Christa Dietzen joins us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Christa, two-time Olympian, was a silver medalist in 2012 and a bronze medalist in 2016. And on this episode, this is part one of a two-part podcast. We talked to her about her journey to volleyball, how she became a volleyball player and fell in love with the sport. And then we talk about her college career, which was pretty good. She was a two-time national title winner at Penn State, played volleyball there all 4 years, starting as a freshman, was the Big Ten Player of the Year in 2007, and just had some great success as a Nittany Lion at Penn State. And then we hear her journey to the Olympics. I always wonder, as just a sports fan in general, how does one become an Olympian? Are you just named to the team? Do you have to do tryouts? Are you just kind of expected because you're the best player that you're automatically on the team? What does that look like? So I asked Christa how she became an Olympian, and her story is really good. And I just enjoyed talking to her about that. And then we hear her testimony, how she became a Christian and where her faith in Christ began. And I love it because it happened while she was kind of pursuing this Olympic dream at the same time when she gave her life to Christ in 2010. So really great stories here. Part one of a two-part conversation with Christa Dietzen, two-time Olympian, former USA women's volleyball team captain, here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Take a listen. Christa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's good to talk to you, Christa, and we're happy you joined us. Thanks for being here. A two-time Olympian, now retired. But let's go back. We like to do that on the podcast and start where the journey kind of began and kind of took shape. So for you, where did that begin for you when you developed a love for the sport of volleyball and maybe the first time you played?
Sure. So I grew up, I have two younger brothers. I grew up just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So Western Pennsylvania is a big time girls basketball area. Yeah. And that was kind of my first sport that I fell in love with. I played that since second grade. My dad played at a small D3 school, Juniata College in the middle of Pennsylvania. And so that was kind of my first sport. And then volleyball came along in seventh grade. I was introduced, actually, it's kind of funny. The high school volleyball coach, was the junior high PE teacher. Mr. Borkovic was his name. And, so he recruited all the tall basketball players, in junior high and in PE gym class to give volleyball a try. So smart, thankful for that. And, began playing in seventh grade. I fell in love with the sport because I loved basketball, but I really enjoyed the team dynamic of volleyball. Just that it truly, not that by any means basketball is an individual sport, but it's a true, team sport in the aspect of, everybody's involved in every play. It's 3 touches to get it over the net. Those types of dynamics I just really was drawn to. And I liked the blend of, to be honest, I didn't like the contact of basketball too much. I was the tallest, so I was playing under the boards, but very thin. So I would get, rocked around quite a bit. So I like the volleyball, kind of you on that side of the net, me on my side of the net.
Nobody's going to try to take you out, right?
For sure. But you still had the aggressiveness of the blocking, of the attacking. So I don't know, it just really fit my personality. And it took off in 7th grade, played both sports both basketball and volleyball until 10th grade. And then decided to focus solely on volleyball, just because there were some coaching changes with basketball and some other things, and just felt like it was the time to sort of focus on volleyball.
We're talking to Christa Dietzen here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. You get to Penn State and have great success there, 2 national championships, and just having, I'm imagining, a great time being a Pittsburgh native and being in Pennsylvania and being at Penn State. Tell us about your time there with the Nittany Lions and what that was like.
Yeah, so 2.5 hours from Pittsburgh. I was certainly open to going, further away from home, but there was something about Penn State. I was very drawn to the family-like atmosphere, and I think it transcends in all the sports up there at Penn State, but especially the volleyball program. I can remember getting handwritten letters from the coaching staff. And that really, and that was even, before the big digital, that was kind of the beginning of the digital age and, the text messaging and all that stuff. But it really spoke volumes to both me and my parents. And then just how the assistant coaches would bring their families, their kids to, these big AU volleyball tournaments, junior Olympic volleyball tournaments, in all different parts of the country. So it just really, you got to know their family, their spouses, their kids. And then, they have this whole booster club. So it's kind of your family away from home. And granted, I wasn't too far, but, just this whole support staff that, people just love the program, love the university. And I was really drawn to that. And that was probably the biggest, I guess how I ultimately ended up at Penn State.
And then when you're there, you're obviously having a lot of success. Does volleyball come pretty naturally to you? Did you acclimate yourself to the college game pretty easily, or was that something that took a little while for you to kind of blend in with, I guess?
Sure. So I think, as you continue to, from high school to college, and then if you play beyond college, the game gets faster. It was how I loved, just the high expectations that, the program, had for the team. When I stepped in there as a freshman, we had, an All-American setter, an All-American, libero coming in. So the expectations were high, which I loved that. That was such I was drawn to that challenge. It was something, to be honest, sports, my natural athletic ability made, if I wasn't good at a particular skill, I would just work really hard at it. And it kind of came easy, to be honest. Both in high school, in college, in my freshman year, yes, I had to work hard to earn that starting position my freshman year. But once it came, I was a starter for the next 4 years. So there was never, I kind of was in a starting role since I began sports. And, we'll get to the national team stuff later when that wasn't the case. But, it just it was this cycle of, if I wasn't performing well in a particular area, I would work hard and then I would have success. So it was just this cycle that sort of worked for me all throughout high school, all throughout college. And that what I didn't realize at the time is my identity was totally wrapped up in my performance, because I was in that cycle where, I would get good and, I would keep having this success. I would, it would lead to more opportunities. And it was a fantastic, and a really fun 4 years. And, I think, and I credit so much to my teammates, again, that goes back to that drawn to the volleyball, one of the ultimate team sports. If you don't have the girls around you that are pushing you, that are making the team great, the USA team never happens.
Yeah.
We end up going to 2 Final Fours, my junior and senior year, winning 2 national titles. And then, then that leads to a call, that kind of opened the door for the call to come and join the USA team.
I love that. We're going to tell that story in a second because I am fascinated about how one becomes an Olympic volleyball player. But I want to talk about your faith. You've mentioned it kind of a couple times here. That's important to you, obviously. Where does that start for you? When is your first sort of, acclamation to faith? And then when is that moment when you say yes to the Lord?
So kind of have to start back at the beginning. Grew up in a Presbyterian church. And yeah, God to me was church on Sundays and saying and doing the right thing, being a good person.
Yeah.
I did not know that there was a relationship piece. I kind of just thought as God as someone very far away. Honestly, like in the clouds, I had to make sure I was being a good person, doing the right things. And then I was worthy to pray to God. So it was this, that was kind of my view of it. And so, once you begin playing competitive athletics, that typically draws you to these travel teams that takes you away, on weekends. And so, again, then kind of church, often I couldn't go to church, because I was playing, on Sundays.
Right.
And then, but I've always believed in God. Again, I just didn't understand that there was this relationship piece. I got to college, fell into the college athlete, cycle of partying, of, just not walking, with the Lord. And I remember, I had actually found a Presbyterian church in Penn State, and I would go from time to time. But again, it was this thing where, if I had, if I don't know, I didn't go out on Saturday night, then I felt worthy to go to church the next day. It was just this, I had to make sure I was okay in order to even be worthy to pray to God.
Yeah.
So it was just, this, now I know, just such a backwards view, of faith of God. And so transitioning into, the USA team. And I think I'd mentioned, I was just stuck in this. I had, my identity was so wrapped up in performance and what people thought of me, because, I had found, and I think I mentioned at the beginning, I'd found my identity, my worth, because I found where I belonged in sports. So that's where the people that I got along with, that I connected with, my teammates, they were like me. And so, people, in high school, winning a state championship and then going on to play, I'm from a small town, and people knew me as Christa, the volleyball player. And so and I felt, that's kind of where I felt, love from people, because if I played well, then it led to more, Penn State, and then eventually the USA team. And so I was stuck in this cycle of performance. And sure enough, I get to the national team. And, you're in a gym full, everybody's an All-American. Like everybody, in college, it's a little different because, you get on a team, and for sure you have to work to get that starting position. Absolutely. But it's not like you're going to be, you're there on scholarship. I was there on scholarship. You're not going to get booted, off the team. Whereas you get to the national team, there's 25 girls in the gym competing for 12 spots on the Olympic team. So every single day is a tryout.
Yeah.
And and there's 25 girls training. They actually take 14 to all the different tournaments leading up to the Olympic Games. So you have World Cup, World Championships, and now they've got all sorts of other tournaments in the different years leading up to the Olympic Games. So you're in a constant high expectation, high stress environment of, at any given point, you can move down the food chain and be done. So that whole cycle of, okay, I wasn't good at something. So I'd work really hard and then I'd get good at it. That wasn't working anymore. And so what ended up happening is that whole performance mindset, God had to pull me out of that, because my identity, my worth, everything was so wrapped up into that performance piece. And for me specifically, the skill of serving. So it's the only skill in volleyball where your action is not directly related to somebody else's action. So, it's just you and the ball back there, and you've got to put it over the net and serve a good serve in the court. And it was never an issue in high school, never an issue in college necessarily, but it wasn't a strong point of mine. It wasn't something where my natural God-given athletic talent could take over. And so it began to be a problem. And it was as if serving was that weakness of serving was threatening my identity. And because I thought my identity was in volleyball. And so that weakness, it just ate at me. And so I developed performance anxiety, and then it bled into, I was my two strongest skills were blocking and hitting. And that performance anxiety bled into those two skills. And, to be honest, so I joined the team in 2009 and May of 2009. So 2009, 10, 11, by 2011, I was pretty low. Those first 2 years, on the national team, yes, I was struggling with serving, but I was still this young player that, and my hitting and my blocking kind of, helped mask that a little bit. Yeah. And, by 2011, so the year before the Olympics, I was pretty low where, my coaches even had told me afterward, like, you're almost cut. And sure enough, I have this breakthrough. And all during that time, and sorry, I know I'm kind of jumping around, but all during 2009, 2010, 2011. So I was introduced, it was really interesting. I was introduced to FCA volleyball, and I was never connected in college to Athletes in Action or FCA. I remember hearing that, the existence of them, but I never, I wasn't walking with the Lord. And so I was introduced to the director of FCA volleyball, actually, and it was just getting started out here in Southern California. And so through FCA, through a teammate, through that director, I came to learn, that there was this relationship with God. And I remember going to my first non-denominational church, Rock Harbor, here in Orange County. A teammate actually brought me one Sunday, and I was just wrecked during worship. I'm like, what is happening? Like, just weeping, just it's like the words, on the screen that we were singing were just like jumping right at me, and, just piercing my heart. And, I didn't know that was the Holy Spirit at the time. And it was this, deep, I began to learn what intimacy with God was like. And then he wanted a relationship. And sure enough, I was in this very vulnerable state of, dealing with the performance anxiety, on the court, and, who am I outside of volleyball? And so, the Lord just used those 3 years. I remember I gave my life to Christ in, it was June of 2010. And, I love telling this this part, and it wasn't this quick fix. It was like I gave my life to Christ and then all of a sudden I was this great server. No,
Right.
like he had to break down those walls of, and refine my character, because if, I always say, had the Lord released me from that fear of serving, that deep anxiety that I had, I would have totally I would have been like, hey, thanks, Lord. And then I would have gone back to my, me trying to control it. And my identity would be right back where it started from. And I just feel like he used those 3 years to teach me to rely on him, and to teach me that he cared. I remember thinking like, God doesn't care about volleyball. Like, what does, I thought they were two separate things that I had to choose one or choose the other. And now, I can't explain going to the Olympics in 2012 or 2016 without including God, because he was the one that brought me through that performance anxiety, allowed me to have a breakthrough in the fall of 2011, several months, before the Olympics. And then I'm starting at the Olympic Games. I mean, I can't explain any of it without God. And when he did release me in the fall of 2011 from that performance anxiety with serving, it was during a water break, actually. I knew that I could not take back control. And I think about it as keeping my hands open, because was it the greatest serve of the book? No. It wasn't until I struggled with, it wasn't my best skill, all throughout the rest of my career, but I was constantly relying on God to calm my mind, to strengthen me, and to continue to teach me to rely on him.
It's a great story. And I love that there's a lot of layers to it, because everybody's journey to Christ isn't just this instantaneous, everything's perfect, everything's great. It's literally, I tell people for myself, it was a process. And it sounds like it was a process for you as well. So take me through, okay, now you have this relationship with the Lord, and it happens sort of after the U.S. Olympic team, not the Olympic team, but the U.S. team starts to come into fruition. So let's go back, I guess, on the court for a minute and just tell us, for the audience, how does one become an Olympian? How does that process work? How does the selection process work? You kind of mentioned it a little bit, but take us through a little deeper.
Sure. So I got a call shortly after we won the national championship at Penn State in December of 2008. I got a call from the national team coach, hey, we want you to come out in the spring of 2009 and, try out and see what happens. And so I was invited out. I ended up joining the team in May of 2009. And so what happens is, and to be honest, I graduated at a perfect time. The Olympics were in 2008. So there's a lot of people end up retiring, and then there's this whole new generation that comes in. And so typically they have 25 girls on the team at a time, training at a time. Now there can be anywhere, from 40 to 60 plus girls that kind of cycle through the gym, not at one time, but just throughout those years leading up. They called it the quadrennial, the 4 years leading up to the Olympic Games. Okay. And so year one, there's turnover, girls retire. So the team has to kind of try and find its identity again. And there's several tournaments each summer. So we train from May until October. And then what happens is, then we pick up and go overseas, and play on professional teams. There's no pro league here in the States. So, we go and play in various countries, like spread out all over the world. And that's where we, make our living. And so this is 12 months a year, volleyball. And so, you play in these tournaments with the U.S. team. So there's a selection process. They usually take 14 girls to different tournaments. So year one, there's an annual tournament, and then there's something called Grand Champions Cup. And so basically, and then the following year is World Championships. And then the year before the Olympic is World Cup. And so if you're making these big these rosters, then the more you make those rosters, the more likely you can kind of start to see the Olympic, like who's starting, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
By the time the Olympic year rolls around, there's usually probably 6 girls that you're pretty sure are going to go, they're going to go to the Olympics. And then there's a bunch on the bubble where it's, be down between 2 girls or whatnot. And so again, if you're making the rosters in the years leading up to the Olympics, if you're going overseas and having great professional seasons, that only helps your chances, because the coaches watching and watching your stats. Now with the technology to be able to watch all the matches online, so there's always eyes on you. And so that's so fast forward the year of the Olympic Games, the gnarliest month of the entire quadrennial is May of the Olympic year. It is incredible, like incredibly awesome, but so you can cut the tension with a knife in the gym. It's amazing, but what ends up happening is it makes everybody is bringing, not that they're not bringing their best all those years before, but there's like the bar is raised, and because people are fighting for spots, the team's trying to be its best. And so, yeah, and it's honestly something where you never know when somebody's going to peak. And for me, I peaked that spring. I had a great professional season, and from 2011 into 2012, and spring of 2012, I peaked. And so again, you never know when that's going to happen. And they chose the team a week before leaving for the Olympic Games.
Wow. That's not exactly a lot of heads up.
It's not, no. And especially if you're in the bubble, it's something where, I'll never forget that moment, but, you never, the girls in the bubble, even their families are kind of waiting, like, do we book tickets? Do we not? But that's kind of how the process goes. And I think that just speaks, the game in the sport of volleyball, there's so many great female athletes. I know it's on the men's side too, where, they're competing until the last possible day.
And we do appreciate Christa Dietzen, 2-time Olympian, former USA women's volleyball team captain. Part 1 of our conversation with Christa. We appreciate her for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Tomorrow we'll be releasing part 2 of our conversation with Christa. It gets a little emotional because I ask her about that moment. We all have moments in our lives, and I ask her about a moment in her life as far as reaching the U.S. Olympic team, and she talks about that and shares that and what that's like, just being in the Olympics, the experience of being in the Olympics, 2012 and in 2016. And so I think you guys will really like our conversation. I enjoyed talking to Christa, and part 2 of that conversation comes tomorrow morning. Make sure you download and subscribe to the Sports Spectrum podcast and listen to that conversation. We thank Christa for being a part of the podcast. We also thank you for listening to this episode. We would love to encourage you not only, again, to subscribe to the podcast, but we really love you to have you subscribe to the magazine that we have. So if you go to sportspectrum.com, you'll see a ton of content on there, the website, lots of articles, daily articles, devotionals, videos, all types of content there. We also have this podcast. That's our second sort of form of communication and form of media. And then the third is the magazine. And the magazine's been around for 30 plus years. We're talking 1985 when this magazine came into existence. And we're very proud of the magazine. It's a really great tool, really great piece to hand to someone. I think in this day and age with digital technology, I get it. The phones and the tablets, those are certainly convenient, and the way that people are consuming content now. But there's still something about holding a magazine in your hand. I don't care what age you are, and you open it up and you see these huge, really neat pictures and great, commentary and devotionals in the magazine and articles on the intersection of sports and faith. There's something about opening up a magazine still to me that I think is good and really great about just being able to touch it, something tangible in your hand. And, that's what this magazine is. And it can help. It has helped a lot of people. And it's a great outreach tool. I mean, if you are a part of a church, a men's group, youth group, whatever it is, man, it's $18 to subscribe to the magazine. And think about that. So you could get like six or seven subscriptions and still be under $100 for the year. And it's $18 for an entire year. You get our quarterly magazine plus a welcome edition magazine and some special edition magazines as well. $18. So I just want to encourage you, because it really is a great idea. It makes a great gift, especially as we get near the holidays here with Christmas coming up and certainly after Thanksgiving. I mean, gosh, we're in late October here, but it just makes a great gift. $18 for an entire year. Buy one for yourself and buy one for someone else. Go to sportspectrum.com and subscribe today. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. We'll see you next time, tomorrow actually, for part 2 of our conversation with Christa Dietzen here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Have a great rest of your day.